This video is sponsored by LetsGetChecked. To test your testosterone at home and get 20% off, check out the link in the description box below. Since I have been working out, which at this point is a long time, I think everybody has always looked for the magic supplement or compound or pharmaceutical, the magic substance, which is actually going to have a tangible improvement on your ability to build muscle mass while at the same time not having overly negative side effects. I have recently been made aware of a new class of compounds, which for the first time doesn't seem like it's all just a bunch of bullshit and hype, and that is what I want to talk about in today's video. But before we get into that, I first need to kind of set the stage. This right here is sort of like a spectrum of all the different anabolic substances, supplements, compounds, drugs, everything that you can take to help from a performance standpoint. We're talking muscle strength, overall being a better lifter. So just to throw some on the board right now, over here at the very beginning, for what essentially does nothing, you have, let's say, natural, traditional test boosters. Tribulus. This is one of those old school compounds that a lot of companies are going to try to push because it's like it's some weird herb that's been used for hundreds of years by like tribes in the rainforest or something, and supposedly it has anabolic effects because it's supposed to be a natural way to boost your testosterone, when in reality it doesn't do shit besides burn a hole in your wallet. Everybody's favorite creatine, one of the only supplements that actually is not complete bullshit. But that being said, don't expect that much more than this bullshit, but we've still got a lot to go. Then moving on to the other side of the spectrum, we're getting into a bit more of the big boy compounds. Over here we have testosterone. We have reached the steroid side of this spectrum. Now, there is still more that you can do. There are compounds more powerful and obviously more dangerous than regular old testosterone, but at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, you're taking an anabolic steroid, clearly it's going to be to the right of the spectrum, and then if you go further, you're going to get into crazy shit. A good example of this would be something just like straight up tren. Now, there are three very important factors which are going to be changing and most importantly increasing as we move from left to right on this spectrum. Number one, as we move more to the right, we're getting more likely that these compounds are going to be banned in natural competition. They are going to be banned by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association. Number two, they are going to be more and more synthetic. Now, this one's a little bit subjective, but essentially what I'm trying to get at is the more and more you move to the right on this spectrum, the less and less natural these substances become. This is not you getting stuff which is already found in your body or food or some weird plant that's just been kind of like refined and extracted. No, we're talking synthetic versions of hormones. This is one of the reasons why testosterone isn't completely to the right on this spectrum, because although it is a synthetic hormone, it's a synthetic bio-identical version of the hormone that your body already has. And then over here, I don't even know what the shit this is. These are compounds which have never existed on the face of the earth up until maybe a few decades ago. This isn't testosterone, which has been in humans for hundreds of thousands of years, or creatine, or some random plant that exists in nature. No, this is some shit that men in white lab coats concocted like 20 years ago, specifically to put muscle on cattle, and then we just started abusing the fuck out of it in the bodybuilding world because we're dumb. Dangerous. This is going to be stuff like hepatotoxicity, so damaging the liver, negative effect on cardiovascular parameters, hair loss, acne. Even some of these compounds can actually lead to some psychological changes. Overall, just a mess of things which contribute to why I personally have not taken them and don't plan on doing so, at least for the foreseeable future. The elephant in the room, because there is a new compound. Well, actually, it's not new. The Russians have apparently been using this for decades, but recently it's become a little bit more popular. Derek from More Plates, More Dates, one of my favorite fitness channels at the moment, especially from the topic of supplementation and overall bodybuilding pharmacology, recently did a few videos on this. What I'm referring to is a class of compounds known as ecdysteroids. Now, if all this talk of anabolics and testosterone has got you guys curious about your own hormonal profile, then definitely check out the sponsor of today's video, Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is a fast and inexpensive service that provides health blood tests you can do from the privacy of your own home. This can be anything from general health metrics to hormones to even sexual health tests. I personally use and recommend the Male Hormone Plus test as it provides you with a reading of testosterone, SHBG, and estrogen. This way, if something comes back outside of the normal range, especially if it's low testosterone, you will know right away that it may be time to speak to a doctor or at the very least start implementing some lifestyle changes to get those numbers up. Also, they gave me a promo code, so you guys can get 20% off your entire order using code Vitruvian. So, if you have never checked your hormones, or if you have in the past and want to get an update to make sure that they're still at healthy levels, check out Let's Get Checked using the link in the description box below. So, in the grand scheme of things, there are three categories of steroids. First, you have those found in vertebrates, which includes us. This would be overall all androgens. You know, sex hormones, corticosteroids, testosterone, estrogen, everything found in you and I falls under this category. Then you have plants which use something called brassinoids, I probably butchered that. And then finally, you have arthropods, or insects, which use something called ecdysteroids. But actually, about 5 to 6% of plants have been found to contain them as well. We call these phytoecdysteroids. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Before you start freaking out, thinking, Igor, what the fuck are you talking about? Are you seriously gonna sit here with a straight face and tell us to eat bug steroids? Actually, yeah, sort of. And you know what? You guys probably already are. You just don't know it. This is because these ecdysteroids are already found in humans because of the food that we consume. Ecdysteroids have already made their way into all of our bodies through foods like mushrooms, quinoa, spinach, asparagus. There's like a whole slew of plant-based foods which contain small amounts of ecdysteroids, which ends up in our bodies. Now, that being said, this isn't a very high amount. Traditional Western diets only probably get around 1 milligram of ecdysteroids on a daily basis, but I do think that this illustrates that this is, at the end of the day, a natural substance already found in nature. This isn't some random synthetic crap that some mad scientist made because he's hell-bent on turning into a literal Spider-Man. Now, what makes things really interesting is that ecdysteroids actually, at least at this point in time in the scientific literature, there is no identified pathway. There's no identified bonding between ecdysteroids and typical human androgen receptors in your body. These are the receptors commonly used to bind with anabolic androgenic steroids like testosterone, for example. However, there is evidence that ecdysteroids can still elicit a slightly anabolic effect in humans by binding to an estrogen receptor in our bodies, specifically named estrogen receptor beta. Now, at this point in time, some of you guys might have just heard that, that buzzword estrogen, and you might be a little confused. You may be thinking, like, estrogen, that's not responsible for muscle, that's the female sex hormone. Isn't that something that we are trying to limit to the best of our ability when it comes to putting on muscle and losing body fat? No. Estrogen is an extremely important hormone, both in the female and male body, which is responsible for like 700 different critical functions, ranging from libido to cardiovascular health, and yes, anabolic effects, namely the building and preservation of muscle mass. This is actually a big reason why steroid-taking bodybuilders typically include, or at least they should, include one compound at minimum in their stacks or their cycles, which is a testosterone derivative. Not just because they want that compound in their overall cycle, but also because that compound is going to convert via a process called aromatization into estrogen, allowing their bodies to maintain a healthy estrogen level throughout the duration of their cycle. Because if you don't do this, or if you take a bunch of other, anti-estrogen related drugs and you crush your estrogen levels into the ground, you will feel like absolute dog shit. This is actually the way that ecdysteroids work. They're able to stimulate this receptor, which is why we refer to them as estrogen receptor beta agonists. Agonists in this case meaning to stimulate something. You guys ever hear in like movies, the main bad guy or the main villain is referred to as the antagonist because he goes against the main guy, the protagonist? This is kind of like the opposite of that. Now, the beauty of all of this is that according to the science, at least at this point in time, although there does seem to be a slight anabolic response, there is virtually, well, at this point, it's not even virtually, there just isn't at this point in time an identified androgenic response. Androgenic meaning all of the other non-muscle building properties or side effects that comes with the use of anabolic steroids. This includes things like hair loss, acne, natural testosterone suppression, negative cardiovascular effects, and just like a slew of like 50 other negative health ramifications, which is a big reason why when it comes to anabolic steroid use, it's not exactly the healthiest thing, especially long term. So guys, if you were anything like me, you might be starting to get a little excited. You might be thinking like, holy shit, Igor, did we do it? Have we found the holy grail of fitness supplementation? Well, maybe, because there is still one more question left to answer, and that is, do these things actually work? Okay, study number 1. This was actually the first piece of literature I've ever seen regarding ecdysteroids. This was the main article referenced by Derek in his video. And essentially what they did is they took rats pre and post puberty, and then they gave them essentially multiple different kinds of compounds, including ecdysteroids, 2 ecdysteroids specifically, ecdysterone and testosterone. In addition, they also tested like 10 other compounds, none of which really matter for the purposes of this video, except for the last one, narrowball, which is actually another way of referring to dianabol, which is a very high-powered anabolic steroid. So the really interesting thing in this study was that the 2 rats, the rat populations consuming ecdysteroids, actually saw a significantly greater weight gain than the control group, so much so that it was actually close. The testosterone actually beat out the narrowball by a slight margin. That's surprising. That, especially from a compound which is supposed to be non-androgenic and weaker than traditional anabolic steroids, this was interesting at the very least. Now, that being said, before you guys start letting go with the fireworks and buying up all the ecdysteroids that you can possibly get your hands on, this study isn't exactly like the be-all and end-all in the situation. Number 1, it is a rat study, and in addition, they tracked body weights, which is great, but we're not really interested in getting bigger, period, in terms of how much we weigh. We are more specifically interested in muscle mass, in performance metrics. And fortunately, the second study we're going to be referencing did just that. 46 subjects with an average age of around 25 years and about 1 year of prior training experience in the gym. That is very important, because if you are comparing people who've never touched a weight in their entire lives as opposed to people who have a few years of lifting experience under their belt and thus are sort of desensitized to training, you have to be somewhat careful. And ideally look at the second group, people who already have some prior lifting experience beforehand. The experiment took place over the course of 10 weeks, and the only other supplement or compound they were given was leucine. So essentially just regular old branched chain amino acids. The 4 groups were separated as EC1, which received 200 milligrams of ecdysterone, EC2, which received 4 times that at 800 milligrams, the placebo group, which received nothing, and the control group, which in addition to receiving no supplementation, they also didn't do any training. These were essentially regular people who just sat on their ass. There was a statistically significant increase in muscle mass. Again, this is not just general weight, this is muscle mass in comparison to the placebo and control groups, with specifically 1.58 kilos of lean muscle mass improvement in the EC1 and 2 kilos in the EC2. In addition, there was a statistically significant improvement in overall performance and strength. No significant changes were noted in testosterone concentration, which again makes sense. As I mentioned earlier, there is no identifiable binding to the androgen receptor in mammals. This was interesting. I guess the supplement that they used in this experiment was like, I don't know if it was dosed incorrectly or maybe this is a standard thing when it comes to refining ecdysteroids, but the amount that was actually found in each of the pills, which were labeled to be 100 milligrams of ecdysterone, one pill was only found to have 6 milligrams, 6 versus the 100 that was apparently promised, meaning that the actual dosages were not 200 and 800 milligrams, they were as low as 12 and 48 milligrams per day for the EC1 and EC2 groups, respectively. That being said, even at these significantly lower dosages, putting on 2 kilograms of lean body mass on top of the placebo and the control group, which had nothing if not negative changes in lean muscle mass, that is fairly positive evidence. Okay, study number 3. This time around, they tested 3 compounds, ecdysterone and 2 others, which, to be honest, I have no hope of even pronouncing. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm only going to be focusing on the ecdysterone supplementation in comparison to the placebo. Once again, 1 year of training experience under their belt, 8 weeks on a 4 times per week standardized training program, and once again, the only other supplement that they were allowed to consume was regular old protein supplements. Training resulted in statistically significant increases in DEXA fat-free mass for all groups, which, duh, you working out is probably going to put, on some muscle mass. It's not exactly new information. However, no statistically significant differences were observed among the PME and CSP3 groups. And again, the most important one in this case is the E, the ecdysterone group. When it comes to performance, once again, training resulted in statistically significant increases, but no statistically significant interactions were observed amongst the 3 groups, respectively, in mean changes in bench press 1 rep max. So apparently the leg press did see some decent results. Substances were overall tolerated well with no reports of medical problems or side effects. And the conclusion is these findings do not support contentions that ecdysterone supplementation during resistance training enhanced gains in strength, power, or muscle mass. This one is a piece of evidence involving actual humans, not lab rats or rodents or anything. And in contrast to the previous study I just mentioned, didn't see that great results, both from a muscle mass and strength standpoint. And the 4th and final study I want to mention in this video, unfortunately, when it comes to this one, I was not able to actually track it down, partly because I think it's written in Russian from 1988, and unfortunately, I do not read Russian. Потому что я приехал в Канаду, когда мне только было 4 лет, я уже знал, как говорить по-русски, но читать я никогда не научился. However, I did find that it was referenced so many times, like so many times when I would find sources or other articles or studies, a lot of times these ones would be in the citations. I did fortunately find a little bit of a summary. 78 highly trained male and female athletes served as subjects in one of 3 experimental groups: protein, and ecdysterone, and a placebo. So essentially, nothing. At the end of the results, they found that the protein group had a slight increase in muscle mass. The placebo group saw a slight decrease in muscle mass. And then the 3rd and final group consuming both protein and ecdysterone saw a 6 to 7% increase in muscle mass and a 10% decrease in body fat mass. So this isn't like you went from 20% body fat to 10% body fat. No, this is a 10% reduction in total body fat mass. So if you take a 200-pound guy, he's got 50 pounds of total fat on his frame. A 10% reduction would be losing 10% of that, which takes you from 50 pounds down to 45. But still, that's not nothing, not at all. The final verdict, at least in my personal opinion, is somewhat positive. The number one thing I was looking for when I was looking through all of these different articles, and there was more, I only mentioned a couple in this video because I didn't want this to go on for 60 minutes, but there is a considerable amount of literature out there on this topic. The number one thing I was focusing on in my research is safety. Did any of the subjects have any negative health ramifications? Did they experience any secondary side effects? Were their blood panels clean? Is there an effect on your androgens? Is there an effect on, things like testosterone levels of DHT, all this stuff? I didn't see any of that. And actually, all of this seemed promising enough for me personally that I think that I don't just want to, sit here and be like, okay, that was cool, moving on. I am actually curious about this for myself. So guys, you can officially consider this like my announcement that I will be trying something a little new on this channel. This one is testosterone. This is one of the 2 ecdysteroids I mentioned earlier in the video. Remember, it was this one and ecdysterone. This one is supposedly slightly stronger. This comes from Gorilla Mind, which is the company owned by Derek. Again, I mentioned him earlier in the video for more plates, more dates. There are other sources. There are other, other companies which manufacture. Actually, they don't do testosterone. No one I've seen was able to find Testosterone. I've seen a couple other companies doing ecdysterone, but at the end of the day, I figured, you know what, like I've been watching Derek's content for a good amount of time. You know, I enjoyed, but most importantly, I respect his, you know, generally unbiased overall scientific approach when it comes to the topic of sports supplementation and pharmacology. So this was the best avenue for me personally. Also, I do want to mention that this has in no way, shape, or form, this is not a sponsored video. I didn't even get this for free. No, I paid for it. It ain't cheap because unfortunately, the dosages that you need to consume are relatively high. So I had to pretty much I got a third one somewhere around here. So yeah, guys, I will be giving this a try. And this, I gotta be honest, was a little bit of a moral dilemma. Am I natural anymore? I mean, it's kind of a complicated question to answer because on one hand, it is technically a steroid, although it's found in arthropods, it's found in bugs, and there is no androgenic hormone binding capability in humans at all. But on the other hand, you know, it's also found naturally in nature, similar to something like creatine, which is found in certain animals and, you know, naturally already found in our bodies and in our diets. At the end of the day, the only one question that really mattered was, are ecdysteroids in general, or specifically testosterone in my case, banned by the World Anti-Doping Association? And the answer is no. However, they are actually on the WADA observation list, if I remember correctly. Essentially, what they are doing is they are monitoring this substance. And eventually what's going to happen is down the road, could be in a few months, could be in a few years, I have no idea, they're going to make a decision as to whether or not they should remove it from their monitoring list completely because it doesn't do anything and it's, you know, it's as safe and benign as creatine, or are they going to add it to their banned substance list? Which at that point in time, yes, technically that would mean that I'm consuming a performance-enhancing compound. But at this point in time, the answer is no, although I'll be perfectly fair, it's kind of like it's a weird limbo scenario. It is possible that you might no longer consider me to be a 100% true lifetime natural bodybuilder, and in that case, that's okay. And for all of you, obviously, if you disagree with that, then great, then woo, I still retain my natty card. At the end of the day, I really don't give a shit. My main issue with using performance-enhancing drugs has always been twofold. Number one, I don't want to do it in competition, but if I didn't compete, that wouldn't really be a problem. Or if I did compete, if I didn't do it in natural competitions, whatever. The main problem was the negative health ramifications. My main issue with steroids was never like, oh, you're cheating, or you know, it's not real muscle, it's fake muscle. No, I don't give a shit about any of that. You do you. Again, libertarian, it's a free country, have fun. My only issue was the dangers of it, especially for me as someone who is already a little bit more susceptible to this. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I do not have the best skin. I have been acne prone my entire life, and it's not something that I am really okay with, especially when it comes to traditional anabolic steroids and their androgenic effects, because if they give acne to people who have normally, you know, they're not really that prone to it, what the fuck are they gonna do to me? I look like someone who's been on blasting gear my entire life from an acne standpoint, and I'm doing this naturally. So like, what the fuck would happen if I just started slamming test, you know, tomorrow? Probably not a good idea. So that is what I'm going to be doing for the next 60 days. We are going to be doing this legit. I've got a DEXA scan scheduled in a few days. We're going to get before and after. I've got a whole new training program set up. I'm going to walk you guys through that in my next video. So yeah, guys, welcome to what is essentially me introducing the next 60 days of this sort of experiment I will be attempting on my channel, where either I turn into Spider-Man or nothing happens and I'm out $200.